Committee will come to order. Are these microphones on?
I think these have to be turned on individually.
Committee will come to order. Committee meets this morning to receive the testimony from the Chiefs of Staff of the four military services on the amended fiscal year 1990-91 defense authorization request and on the relationship between our military strategy and the budget request. The Chief's testimony follows a series of strategy-related hearings by the committee on the implications of President Gorbachev's security and economic policies, on the negotiations on conventional forces in Europe, and on our military strategy and operational requirements. We've had these discussions with outside witnesses as well as with Admiral Carlisle and with the combatant commanders. Yesterday we began our review of the amended fiscal year 1990-91 defense authorization request with testimony from Secretary Cheney and Admiral Carlisle. Senator Vuono and I have asked our witnesses this morning, the chiefs of each one of the military services, to focus their testimony on how the service's fiscal year 1990-1991 authorization request supports the objectives of our military strategy and the operational requirements of the combatant commanders. These are the issues they must wrestle with each day as the head of each service and as members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The major missions of the Defense Department and the priorities that should be assigned to these missions, and the relationship of the service's budgets to these priorities. This time I want to welcome General Carl Vuono, Chief of Staff of the Army, Admiral Carlisle Trost, Chief of Naval Operations, General Al Gray, Commandant of the Marine Corps, and General Larry Welch, Chief of Staff of the Air Force. After each of you have given your opening statements, we will, of course, have a number of questions for you. Senator Vuono.
Mr. Chairman, I'll put my statement in record. I join you in welcoming these distinguished gentlemen.
I have no opening statements, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. We're pleased to have all of you. General Vuono, we'll begin with you.
The NATO alliance, and a cornerstone of that is forward deployed forces. And so I believe we must keep those forces. I think any move to unilaterally withdraw forces at a time that we are at the negotiating table for conventional force enhancement talks would be an absolute mistake.
Strategic modernization program. The budget calls for rebasing the first 50 peacekeepers into the rail garrison mode and continues development of the small ICBM for deployment later in the 90s. For the bomber force, we are asking for the funds to complete the baseline for the B-1 and to incorporate some new communications capabilities and some new weapons capabilities into the aircraft that will be incorporated also into other bombers. The B-1 can hold most Soviet targets at risk today, and by completing the revised ECM plan and the other capabilities, it'll serve that purpose for years to come. I have regularly reported to this committee and other interested committees that the development of the B-2 has taken somewhat longer than originally planned, with a concurrent increase in development costs. This budget recognizes those facts of life and modifies the B-2 schedule. I continue to believe, however, that the deliberate pace driven by performance milestones rather than the calendar is the best way to field the right aircraft at the right time, and it is the right aircraft. For the conventional forces, our greatest shortfall clearly is underwriting all the theater strategies with adequate strategic airlift capability. While we have made very significant progress, in fact, we have about doubled that capability since the beginning of this decade, the C-17 remains the only viable approach to filling that requirement.
Those aircraft compared to the V-22 program? Or can you submit that as part of your record?
Yes, we do, Senator. It would be, I think, more appropriate to do as part of the record because these figures move a little bit depending on, and you have to have the detailed rationale behind them. Yeah. Let me say in fairness to Dr. Chu and to the process, we've got to do our bit to find the funds to meet the top line and all of that. And it's a tough operation no matter which service you want to address. But within that context, clearly what emerged is a difference of opinion with respect to the cost-benefit analysis and the data between Defense Department's analysis and ours. Ours comes from a long-standing analysis of this topic based on the fact that you're going to need more Black Hawk-type helicopters to replace the MV-22 and more 53Es to make up the difference, and that the cost differential is considerable over the life cycle.
If you could give us details of that in your statement, I'd appreciate that. And since we have limited time this morning, let me just add, though, that for 9 years the Congress has supported the aircraft, the concept of it, and has spent some $2 billion on it. One of the questions, though, that I had for Admiral Trost, I understand that the company has said that they're going to terminate all their activity with regard to the V-22 as of tomorrow unless the Navy can come up with some additional funding options. What are the prospects in that area?
Senator Glenn, I've read that same comment. I'm not prepared to comment on that because I'm not involved in the contractual relationships. I'd have to defer to Secretary Garrett and offer to provide that.
This was a letter to Secretary of the Navy, I believe. I believe it went to SecNav.
I believe it did, yes,
from
sir.
the company. You don't want to
I've seen the letter, but I don't know the specifics of the business arrangements. I am, under Goldwater Nichols, no longer in that business.
Well, okay. Another subject.
I didn't mean to duck that, but we can provide the answer for the record.
Okay. Move on to a different subject here.
Could maintain F-15E production until we could switch the money to ATA production. And the budget has driven us to accepting a gap between F-15E and ATA. And it's purely a budget decision. However, we have another year to watch ATA. And if ATA proceeds on schedule, and we can be optimistic about it, then I won't be all that uncomfortable. But if we see considerable problems with that, then that will make that gap a lot wider than we have signed up for. But the very short answer is, because of the budget, we have been forced to accept a very undesirable gap in the production of airplanes for that very important dual theater, nuclear, and long-range conventional interdiction role.
And other agreements which would bring about more peace and stability. We should not take our eye off that 70 years as we plan for the future. We do not know how long he will remain or whether his successor will embrace his views and move them forward. I view the land-based strategic systems as the most important insurance policy this nation and the free world has for the future, and the possibility we might see a total 180-degree in the Gorbachev policies and a reversion to the policies that the Soviet Union has followed for some 70 years. Now, as to two systems, and I'll address a specific question to the General momentarily on that, that is a decision the President made in the face of the need to move towards mobility the Soviet Union has today, as we're right in this room, both mobile road and rail systems. They're way ahead of us. And I think it's time that we proceeded with the limited resources we have in that direction. A specific question to you, General Welch. In answer to an earlier question, you stated that the funding for the small ICBM protected the missile deployment. I presume it also protects the development of a survivable basing system, too.
The funding profile proceeds with the missile development. It does not proceed at that same pace with the basing. It protects it, but it doesn't push it forward.
Well, now, we better spend a little time on this, because all too often we create the missile, and I think the MX is somewhat of an example, and we don't have an acceptable consensus of opinion between the executive and legislative branches on a survivable basing system.
Oh. In this case, Senator, I don't think there's any question about what the basing mode is. The question is when we commit funding to going forward with that basing mode. It's when we fund the basing mode. I don't think there's any.
But there's nothing in this budget or your approach to it or the Department of the Air Force to indicate any doubt that we're going ahead with the small ICBM in accordance with the President's wishes.
Assuming that the world unfolds as we currently see it, absolutely not.
Just one additional question, General Welch, and this has to do with SDI. Do you believe that the United States should commit itself now to deploy an SDI system if it's technologically feasible to do so, regardless of what it might cost, regardless of treaty constraints, and regardless of Soviet potential countermeasures? Should we make that commitment now?
Well, that's a hypothetical question that I can conveniently duck because we don't have the information, we don't have the technical work done, and we don't have anything like the confidence in our information to make such a decision now. When we reach the point where we can do that, and presently our estimate is that it'll be sometime after 1992, 1993, before we have completed the technical work that would give us the basis for making the deployment decision. Certainly when we reach that point in time, all of those things you discussed have to be weighed. We have to weigh where we are and what the impacts are of the ABM treaty. And we have to weigh the total cost of that system, which we don't yet know. I think we're on exactly the right path, Senator, to get to that decision. And I don't think there's any basis for making that decision today.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think if you read some of the testimony, though, before the House Armed Services Committee, you will see that there was an appearance of making a commitment to deploy SDI as soon as the capability were there, and made no reference whatsoever to costs, countermeasures, or other factors which have to be considered when you know them. So I'm happy to hear what you're saying today, and I think that is a much more balanced and commonsensical approach to the issue. Well, if none of my other colleagues here have questions, we thank you all for your coming forward as always, and we'll stand adjourned.